I've had my eye on the Class 58s from EFE Rail for some time now, and with many of these models being heavily discounted, I felt the time was right to pick one up and put it through its paces. It's time to take a closer look. Hi, thanks for joining today's video. We'll kick off with an unboxing, and as part of that we'll also look at the fitting of the DCC to this. We're going to be putting in one of the HM7000 decoders, TXS decoders. So, and we'll be running that with the Class 56 profile, which has got the same prime mover as the Class 58. So we'll take a look at that at the end of the unboxing. Then get into the close-up views and 360 views. Follow that with a brief running session, and then get into our usual summary, scoring and final recommendation. Okay, let's get underway. Okay, let's get into this unboxing for this Class 58 from EFE Rail. So this is the first EFE Rail locomotive I've ever purchased, so this was going to be a new experience for me. So you're going to get to go through this as I go through it. So we're looking at this Class 58, 58039 in the EWS Livery, and it comes with a weathered finish as well, which I was kind of interested in getting. So let's see if we can get this guy out. Just going to push him through from the other side. So we've got him out of the box. Some good weight in this. Kind of similar packaging, I guess, to once we get to this stage as the Dapol locomotives. We've got these nice end pieces, which are good because they just help prevent kind of punch through on either side here. So we'll take those out. And we're protected kind of top and bottom as well, as you can see, the styrofoam top and bottom, which is giving another layer of protection. So I think from a packaging perspective, this side of it is pretty good. There we go. And we've got a nice protector over the livery as well. So let's bring him out. We'll take a quick look at just the documentation pieces, and then we'll get into the locomotive. So some detailing parts in there. Some kind of general parts breakdown. It's 8-pin, and again I'm kind of hoping that Hornby will eventually come through for me with one of their TXS decoders for this particular locomotive, the Class 58, because Hornby have done the 58 in the past themselves, so there would be kind of an incentive, I guess, for them to do that. So that's kind of interesting now. I've never seen this before. So we've got the outer frames of the bogies here, an alternative version of them. I wonder what that's all about. Okay. You can see the ones we have on here. So this is supposed to be a kind of a weathered finish, and it's kind of a weathered-ish finish. I've kind of used the paint color and the plastic color rather than kind of overspray of weathering in the main. There's a little bit of overspray in a few areas, but it's a kind of a weathering that isn't 100%. Bachmann did this on a few locomotives. That said, it's not a bad looking model. This is my first 58, as well as being my first EFE Rail model. Just looking, and there's no driver in there. Some buffers as usual. As we saw, there's kind of some air dams. There's a lot of detail there now on that buffer beam. So, wow, if we pick it up there, we'll do the usual close-ups on it. So it's a reasonably heavy locomotive as well. It's very kind of reminiscent of sticking two Class 20s together, kind of gluing them together in the middle. That's kind of what it looks like. It's kind of a mixture of molded detail there and actually separately fitted parts as well. They don't have anything pre-fitted from a coupling perspective, so I'm not quite sure what the front end of this locomotive is actually. I'll have to look it up. There's fans on top there. Nice level of detail overall. I mean, I guess one of the points about these locomotives now is they are heavily discounted. So you're potentially getting a pretty good quality locomotive at a relatively modest price. You know, typically around the kind of 120, 115, 120 pound mark, which is a pretty decent price for a all-wheel drive model like this, you know, to this level of detail and quality. You know, you'll easily pay £85 for a Railroad Plus model, which is a million miles away from this. So yeah, this isn't bad. The weather finish probably isn't as weathered as I kind of was hoping for or looking for, but it'll do. It'll do. It's not a bad livery overall, and there is a good level of detail on this model. So I guess we'll do the close-ups to get a kind of a closer view of it. I'll need to read the manual a bit more to figure out why they're including an alternative set here of these parts, which is kind of interesting. And then they've got some extra rails on here as well, and some extra, well, the actual tension lock hooks are on here. Sockets are on either side for them. There isn't any, only those railings, they're the only other pieces of detail. There's nothing else, and that's because pretty well everything is on the buffer beam. The buffer beams are fully loaded. So how that's going to work when we put a coupler in there, I guess, is going to be a question, because literally pretty well everything is hanging down there. There's chains on either side. There's detailing on either side. So that's not going to really work too well once we put the coupler in there. Okay, let's see how that goes. So I suppose a few question marks. It's an interesting model. Looks to be a pretty good quality model in terms of the build quality and the level of detail, etc. And it's a solid weight on it. A couple of questions that's just, I'll say that the weathering isn't maybe quite where I'd expect it to be. Just looking at the wheels there, and there's no real residue on the wheels because this really hasn't been through a normal weathering process. So there was never any kind of overspray that was being picked up by the wheels, only very tiny amounts. I think there's a bit, you can see a bit on that wheel there, and the outer rim, same there. Okay, I will do a bit of a clean on the wheel just in case, before we try to run her in. But jury's out, I guess. Let's do the close-ups and let's get her on the track and see where we go from there. And again, I'm going to be stuck here. I don't have a sound decoder for this, and so I'll see what I end up running with for the running session. I'll definitely be running it under DCC anyway, so we'll just see if we can get some manner of sound into it for the running session. Okay, that's it. So far, so good. Okay, so before finishing this section, as I mentioned, I want to take a look at the fitting of DCC. So we've opened up the body here. There's just a number of clips. It's a little bit of a tight fit, as you can see there, because the actual body shell does narrow in the middle. So it's a little bit tight to get off. It just takes a couple of minutes, just a bit of care to get it off. As you can see underneath, there's very little in this. The PCB is tiny. It's an 8-pin DCC socket. The lighting is in the front and rear blocks there. There's those black blocks that you see there actually contains the lighting. So there's no other wiring going to the roof. There's no cab lighting, obviously, in this particular model. The motor is driven by on both bogies there, as you can see, and 2 of the axles on each bogie actually are drive axles, as we saw earlier. So here now we've actually fitted in the TXS decoder into the 8-pin socket, and we've kind of just taped things down just to keep everything tight. The Sugar Cube speaker installed. It's one of the smaller housings. You can't fit the larger housing, unfortunately. It just won't fit because there's so much space taken up there at the side with the front area. But I think, as you'll see in the running session, this is actually quite adequate, and it does work very well in this particular model. So, and as I mentioned earlier, the sound profile for the Class 56 is what we will be using. Class 58 does have the same prime mover as the Class 56, so that's going to give us a pretty authentic sound, and even without having a full Class 58 profile from Hornby. So that's what we'll see in the running session, so we'll get into that in a little while. Okay, so now we're going to get into the close-up view, and this is a weathered model, and you'll kind of see that from the underbody and bogies there, and there is a bit of overspray on the wheels, as you can probably see. So there was obviously a spray finish applied here. Now there isn't a lot of spray along the side of the actual body. There is on the roof, and we'll see that in the 360 view. But it is on the underbody there, so it does give that at least an authentic look. You're not looking at, you know, shiny black plastic, which you might otherwise be looking at on a pristine model. Overall, the livery is fine. There's not a lot of fitted detail on the upper body. There were some fitted handrails, all right. But the lower body does have some good levels of detail, as do the bogies. They do look well. Got a large cab area in there. The glazing looks pretty good. And overall, these models are pretty decent for what they are. They wouldn't be to the same level as, say, an Acura scale model, but they're certainly, or even possibly a Bachmann, but there would be a good bit ahead of, say, your typical railroad type model, for example. They're a good bit ahead of that. There we go again. We've got the spring buffers at the front. Again, you can see some weathering at the front there as well. That's been applied. And again, good level of detail, good, nice glazing as well. You can see the roof, and again, you've got some extra weathering around the chimney areas. And overall, the appearance-wise, this is not a bad locomotive at all. And I think in general, if you look across the range, there's a number of different liveries this comes in. They're all pretty good. You can see the detailing kits fitted at the front and rear, which is interesting because they're kind of described as if you have to fit them, but they do come pre-fitted. Now, that's got a separate issue, obviously, when you want to put a coupler on. You're going to be interfering with that detail, but we'll maybe get to that a little bit later. But overall, the appearance, I think on these is good. It's more than adequate. And to be honest, for models like this, I'm absolutely perfectly fine with this. I know you can get layers of extra detail. To be honest, this is a level I'm probably happy with. So we get into the running session, and I guess we are running, as I say, with the TXS decoder installed here, and I think the sound quality, which you'll hear on the separate video, I do have a full running session video separately. I've turned down the sound for the purposes of this video. This is actually a very good runner. Well, the control from the TXS decoder, I think, works very well. Now, it does run at the top speed if you do run with the full maximum speed in CV5 set to 255, for example. You will get a scale speed that's in excess of 100 miles an hour, so that's pretty crazy for this locomotive. So I have tuned this down, and I've set the CV5 setting to around about 180, 190. I think will probably give you the prototypical maximum speed of 80 miles per hour. And that's what I've done, and it gives you a good level of control then as well, because it increases the range of control. So that's what we're kind of running with here. And I have to say, this model did not cause me any problems. We started out on the layer 2 circuit, which has a lot of diamonds and Hornby point work, radius 2 point work. That can be a bit of a bumpy ride, but it didn't have any problems with that. We're on the outer circuit now, where I've got some Pico Express points. And again, no problems. The only issues I had with this running session was actually with the rolling stock, which have a problem with the Pico Express points in a particular direction. And so that did limit me a little bit with the running session here. But the locomotive, no derailment, no stalling. I'm not running with the power pack, for example. I decided when I did my initial running testing on this on DC that I wouldn't need the power pack, and basically I didn't, and it never stalled once on any of that point work or diamonds. And I've had other locomotives that have stalled on those without having a power pack to support them. So this is a very good running locomotive, and I'll reflect that in the scoring. It was a good pleasure to run with. The sound, I think, sounds very good. I think the Class 56 sound actually sounds good in this model, and it's a pretty good match to it because of the alignment with the prime mover. You may have some auxiliary sounds that would be different. So overall, I'm very pleased with this from a running session perspective. Highly recommended locomotive as a running locomotive, and I think, when we look at the scoring, I'll certainly reflect that. This is one of the better performing locomotives I've looked at this year, so very satisfactory in that regard. Okay, so we're looking at this summary for the EFE Rail Class 58. So it came in 4 different liveries, and 2 of them are weathered and 2 of them are pristine. You can see the details there, and the review model that we were looking at today was the last one on that list, the E84008. Come with all-wheel pickup, dual bogie drive, and there are 2 drive axles per bogie. Comes with a 5-pole skew-on motor with dual flywheels, and that gives it very good performance. These are all 8-pin DCC ready, and they run on a minimum radius 2 curve. They will derail on a radius 1 curve. They come with directional lighting, but no cab lighting, however. There is a detailing kit, which is documented in the documentation. It's actually pre-fitted to the two front and rear buffer beams so that you get that out of the box. And it has sprung buffers, some very nice sprung buffers on both ends as well. And it also comes with bogie frames, alternative bogie frames, which you can fit if you choose. Now the top scale speed is much higher than what I've got here. I actually did my measurements with a speed of 85 miles per hour. That's having reduced CV5 to 190. If you leave CV5 at 255, for example, or 0, you'll get a much higher scale speed, which wouldn't be prototypical. So at that speed, it draws 270 milliamps. That's running at 100% power at that particular setting. The unboxed weight is a reasonably heavy 536 grams. And then the selling price can vary quite a bit because these are heavily discounted now. Cheapest versions will sell for $104.95 actually, and they go all the way up to $174.95 for the pristine versions and $184.95 for the weathered versions. That's as of July 2023. So let's get into the scoring. So I guess the eye-opener here is the running performance, which is a 9.5. And the only reason it's not a 10 is it does lack all-wheel drive, which would have an impact in terms of pulling performance or incline performance to a marginal degree, to be honest. And for many people, it won't have any impact at all. So it is a very high score. This is a very good runner. It's on a par with the Bachmann and Accurascale type models, which was pleasantly surprising. And I guess it was trouble-free. That's all I can say. And a good level of control under the TXS decoder that I had installed as well. Appearance and detail is an 8. It isn't quite up there with the Accurascales and Bachmann locomotives, unfortunately, in terms of added detail, though it is absolutely very good, and I didn't have a problem with it. So if you are into the super detailed type models, you may be a little bit disappointed. But if you're into the kind of adequate and it looks fine and will do on your layout, then this is a fine model. There's not an issue there. The only other comment I'd make, I guess, is regarding the weathering, which is kind of incomplete. There's weathering on the bogies, there's weathering on the roof, but there really isn't much weathering on the side body. There is at the front and rear as well. So it's kind of incomplete, the weathering, but I'm still glad to have it, so it's nice to see that. Extras and variants is a little bit limited because it doesn't have a lot of extra bells and whistles. There's no cab lighting, for example. There's no driver. There's no engine lighting or anything like that. There's none of these extra sort of things that you might get on some of the newer models. And as I say, even the weathering itself is kind of incomplete on the weathered models. It looks a little bit better actually on the rail freight version. The weathering on that looks to be a little bit better. Build quality, I'm giving it as an 8.5, and overall I thought it was pretty good for what it was. There is a bit of paint overspray on the wheels, which is visible on this because it is a weathered model, and it's inconsistent. It would be different if the wheel was fully covered, but it isn't. A few little things like that, but overall I didn't have any broken parts or anything like that, so this model is to a good level of quality. The packaging is excellent, and documentation just as a couple of little items I think that aren't fully accurate. The diagram isn't fully representative of what the actual PCB board is, and as I mentioned, they do talk about the detailing kit, but it's actually pre-fitted. So there's a few little things on the documentation side, but the packaging is a 5 out of 5. Price value at the £120 mark, which you can get most of these models for. You'll probably pay more for the red stripe BR Rail Freight model that tends to be more expensive, but the others you probably get around this price are lower, and it's an 8 at that price. And if you can get it for 104, for example, that's more in the kind of 9 or 10 out of 10 type value category. And so overall score is 8.4, and I think that's a very healthy score for a model like this from EFE Rail. So well done to them. I think this is a good score. Coming into this, I think I would have been pretty pleased to see that score at the end. So let's get into my final recommendation. The EFE Rail Class 58 is my first ever EFE Rail model, and overall I'm well pleased with my purchase, thanks to the excellent running performance and the heavy discounting, of course. The fact that the Hornby HM7000 Class 56 sound profile works so well was also a nice bonus. Appearance and detail wise, this model is behind the likes of Accurascale and Bachmann, but it matches them on performance. And for those most discounted variants, it undercuts those models by up to £50 to £60. Add a HM7000 TXS decoder, and you have a top running model with decent appearance, directional lighting, Bluetooth control and sound
for less than £175. While the Class 58 won't be for everyone, given its lifespan relative to the Class 37s and 47s of this world, for those who loved the golden age of diesel at the end of the last century, you won't go far wrong with this incarnation of the Class 58, and I have no hesitation in recommending it, assuming you can get it at a discount in the 25% to 40% range, which is eminently possible, though it will depend on the livery. The other conclusion from this review is that based on this experience, I'd certainly consider other EFE rail models in the future. So what are your thoughts on this Class 58 from EFE Rail? If you already have this model, how has it worked out for you? Also, if you have other EFE rail models, how have they worked out? Please share your experiences and views in the comments. I had been planning to cover off the Dapol Class 59 in my next video, but with the newly released Bachmann Class 70 on its way to me, I'll look to put that model through its paces and cover it off first. So thanks for watching today. Please drop a like if you found this video of interest, and we hope to see you on the next one. In the meantime, take care and happy modelling.